Good morning, students. Hope you all are doing good. Today we'll start with our history textbook. The focus of the history textbook is on the emergence of the contemporary world. In earlier classes, you have read about the history of India. In this year, you will see how the story of India's past is related to the large history of the world. We cannot understand what was happening within India unless we see this connection. Our first chapter is on French Revolution. Today, we often take the ideas of liberty, freedom, and equality for granted. But we need to remind ourselves that these ideas also have a history. By looking at the French Revolution, you will read a small part of that history. The French Revolution led to the end of monarchy in France. A society based on privileges gave way to a new system of governance. So, with this small introduction, we'll start our chapter, The French Revolution. Storming of Bastille. Bastille, it's a fortress prison. It's located in Paris. Yes. The morning of 14th July 1789, the city of Paris was in a alarm. Bastille was hated by all as it stood for the despotic power of the king. The fortress was demolished. Yes, by reading this, you must be filled with all these questions. Why the city of Paris was in state of alarm? Why the Bastille was hated by all? And why the common people has demolished the fortress prison? How and why did this happen? We'll see in our further discussion. French society during the late 18th century. In 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, he found an empty treasury because long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an huge court at the immense palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy, Britain. France helped American colonies because they both had the common enemy, Britain. But the war added more and more debt to the French government. Lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loans. The French government was deeply in debt. It attempted to restore its financial status through unpopular taxation schemes which were heavily regressive. To meet its regular expenses such as the cost of maintaining an army, the court, running government offices or university, the state, it was forced to increase the taxes. But it was a major fail. French society in the 18th century was divided into three states. First state, clergy, group of persons with special functions in the church. Second state, nobility, nobles or aristocratic orders, the group of people who belong to the highest social class and have special title as duke or duchess. And the third state, the common people. The common people included big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, peasants and artisans, small peasants, landless labor, and servants. Within the third state, peasants made up of about 90% of population. However, only a small number of them owned the land they cultivated. About 60% of the land was owned by nobles, the church, and other richer members of the third estate. The members of the first two estates, that is, clergy and nobility, enjoyed certain privileges. Among these was exemption from paying taxes to the state and feudal privileges. Exemption from paying taxes is free from paying the taxes to the state. They don't have to pay the tax to the state. And second one is feudal privileges. Feudal privileges is the privileges which they owned because of their social or the higher position in the French society. And the peasants, they were obliged to render service to the lord. Either they have to work in his house and fields, they have to serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. So by these way, these three states were working. Taxpayers. As we already know, only the members of the third state was paying the taxes, as the other two, clergy or nobility, they have certain privileges. So the third state, they were paying two type of taxes called tithe and tithe. Tithe, a direct tax levied by the church comprising 1/10 of the agriculture produce, and tithe, tax to be paid directly to the state. But they have to pay many indirect taxes also on articles of everyday consumptions like salt or tobacco. For using these things, they have to pay the tax. These taxes were called as indirect taxes. The struggle to survive. The third state or the common people, they were struggling to survive in the French society. The population of France rose from about 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand. So the price of bread, which was the staple diet of the majority, rose rapidly. Most workers were employed as laborers in the workshop, whose owner fixed their wages, but wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. So the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things become worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. This led to the subsistence crisis. Subsistence crisis, it's an extreme situation where the basic means of livelihood are endangered. Middle class. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity, but they lacked the means and programs to carry out full-scale measures would bring about a change in the social and economic order. This was left to those groups within the third state who had become prosperous and has access to education and new ideas. Yes, middle class within the 18th century, they witnessed the emergence of social groups termed as middle class, who earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade and from manufacture of goods such as woolen and silk textile that were either exported or brought by the richer member of society. In addition to merchants, middle classes also include manufacturers, lawyers, or administrative officials. All these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must depend upon his merit. So, among the third state, the middle class, they were termed as a new social group. Philosophers of the era. Yes, as we already know, the middle class or a new social group was started in French society. Among these, the philosophers are the main. John Locke, True Treatise of Government, he wrote about the doctrine of divine and absolute right of the monarch. Rousseau, he carried this idea forward, proposing the form of government based on social contract between people and their representatives. Montesquieu, in the spirit of law, proposed a divine of power within the government between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. This model of government was put into force in the USA after the 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain. The American Constitution and its guarantee of individual rights was an important example for political thinkers in France. These ideas of these philosophers were discussed intensively in saloons and coffee houses and spread among people through books and newspapers. These were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit of those who could not read and write. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes to be able to meet the expenses of the state generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. So the philosophers, they have enlightened the common people or the people of the third estate to change their economic and social position in French society. The outbreak of revolution. Yes, the outbreak of revolution. The National Assembly, these were the main events. The National Assembly, the tennis court oath, storming of Bastille, and the Great Fear. We will see this event one by one. The National Assembly. As we know, why Louis XVI had to increase taxes for reasons we have learned in the previous section. But how do you think he could have gone about doing this? In France, the monarch did not have the power to impose taxes according to his will alone. Rather, he had to call a meeting of the Estates General, which would then pass his proposal for new taxes. The Estates General was a political body to which the three states sent their representatives. However, the monarch alone could decide when to call a meeting of his body. So, on 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called an assembly of the States General. The first and the second estate sent 300 representatives each, who were seated in rows facing each other on two sides, while the 600 members of the third estate had to stand at the back. The third estate was represented by its more prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans, and women were denied entry to the assembly, but their problems and demands were listed in letters which the representative had brought with them. Voting in the State General in the past had been conducted according to the principle that each state had one vote. This time too, Louis XVI was determined to continue the same practice. But members of the third estate demanded that each member would have one vote. When the king rejected this proposal, members of the third estate walked out of the assembly in protest. Yes, the second event, the tennis court oath, is based on this voting system. The representative of the third estate called themselves as spokesmen of the whole French nation. On 20 June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. They declared themselves a national assembly and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France, which would limit the power of the monarch. Yes, they took an oath in the tennis court that they won't move till they have drafted constitution. And this protest was led by Mirabeau and Abbassius. Mirabeau, he was born in the noble family but was convinced of the need to do away with the society of feudal privileges. And Abbassius, originally he was a priest, wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? Yes. So with this, we'll move to the third event. Storming of Basel. Yes. We introduced this chapter with this event because this is one of the major events of France Revolution. The storming of Basel. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of France was in a state of rebellion. A severe winter had meant a bad harvest, so this led to the price of bread rose. Often bakers exploited the situation and hoarded supplies. Hoarded, keeping things in a hidden or carefully guarded place. They were hoarding these supplies. After spending hours in long queues at the bakery, crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. At the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris. On 14th July, the angered crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. Yes. So with this, we know why they have stormed the Bastille, why they have destroyed the Bastille, why they were hating the king, why they were hated king for so long, and how they got this much courage to do so. The Great Fear. In the countryside, rumors spread from village to village that the lords of the manor had hired bands of brigands who were on their way to destroy the ripe crops. Caught in a frenzy of fear, peasants in several districts seized hoes and pitchforks and attacked Chateau. Chateau is a castle which belongs to the king or nobleman, and they looted, hoarded grain, and burned down documents containing records of manorial dues. A number of nobles fled from their homes, many of them migrating to neighboring countries. Faced with the power of this revoluting subject, Louis XVI finally accorded recognition to the National Assembly and accepted the principle that his powers would from now on be checked by the Constitution. So, on the night of 4th August 1789, the Assembly passed a law abolishing the feudal system of obligations and taxes. Members of the clergy too were forced to give up their privileges. Tithes were abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. confiscated. As a result, the government acquired assets worth at least 2 billion livres. Yes, the constitutional monarchy is to limit the power of monarch. The National Assembly completed the draft of the constitution in 1791. Its main objective was to limit the powers of the monarch. These powers, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, now spreaded and assigned to different institutions: the legislature, National Assembly, executive, king and ministers, and judiciary, the judge. The Constitution of 1791 vested the power to make laws in the National Assembly, which was indirectly elected. That is, citizens voted for a group of electors who in turn choose the assembly. Not all citizens, however, have the right to vote. Yes, all citizens, they did not get the right to vote. So, who were the voters? Voters. The active citizens, they have access to vote, and the passive citizens, they don't have to contribute in voting system. Who were these active citizens? Only men entitled to vote. About 4 million of a population of 28 million. Who were passive citizens with no voting rights? About 3 million men, women, children, and youth below 25. Who can be the member of active citizens? A man above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens. That is, they were entitled to vote. The remaining men and all women were classed as passive citizens. To qualify as an elector and then as a member of the assembly, a man had to belong to the highest bracket of taxpayers. Yes, the active citizens, they have to pay the highest number of tax, and women, old, and children, they have no voting rights in French in the constitutional monarchy. Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens. Yes. The Constitution began with a Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens. Rights such as the right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law were established as natural and inalienable rights. That is, they belong to each human being by birth and could not be taken away. It was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. But again, the rights are given only to men, and the same rights, it does not belongs to the woman. So we have seen that how a absolute monarch country, it came to an end and France became a constitutional monarchy. After a long struggle, finally France became a constitutional monarchy which limits the absolute power of the monarch, and they have given the basic fundamental rights to the men. So with this we'll end today's discussion. The rest we'll see in the next class. Till then, thank you and take care.